Hi there, I'm Chris Arkenberg, and today I want to talk a little bit about the way that we relate to media, and increasingly the way that media is relating to us. So first I'm going to talk a bit about the kind of migration that we as almost a species have made onto the internet, onto digital platforms, and how that's increasingly placing our identity at the core of the way services sort of arrange themselves to meet our needs. This is all being really amplified right now by this second wave of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And then finally, it's enabling sort of these new ways of experiencing media and entertainment and storytelling. So again, over the last 25 years or so, we've made this massive migration onto the internet, onto the web, now onto mobile and smartphones. And this has had some really interesting kind of implications, but we're really living in this sort of digital landscape right now, and this enables all sorts of interesting opportunities. Now, as we've sort of aggregated more and more onto mobile, we've gone from sort of the wide open web to essentially experiencing a lot of the internet really within a handful of applications, the sort of favorite home screen apps like Facebook. And advertising has really followed this, chasing us from one platform to another and finally down into these smaller ecosystems. So, and this is reshaping the landscape so much so that Google and Facebook now really dominate digital advertising. And this is really the case because we've been aggregating into these platforms. So these are the top internet destinations on the planet: Google, YouTube, Facebook, and then Baidu. Amazon comes in at number 11. But this is really where we're gathering. And again, increasingly, this is taking the shape of applications on our mobile devices. And really what we're seeing is that as we've engaged the web so thoroughly, that now the web is starting to break out and move into our lives, moving more into our homes, into the hardware that surrounds us. And one of the big kind of trends that's happening right now is this sort of emerging battle for the living room. And of course, the living room has historically been dominated by our set-top boxes, by the cable companies. But we see this new wave of internet giants, of web giants moving into this space. Amazon has been very successful with its Echo line of products. They've sold roughly about 20 million of these right now. And of course, at the center of that sits Alexa, their artificial intelligence personal assistant. Google Home has its assistant, its offering. Microsoft announced a partnership with Harman Kardon. And of course, Apple has its HomePod with Siri in the center. So this is this big effort to really start to get into into the living room in this sort of battle for the interface, to get close to us effectively. And what's maybe important for this new wave of colonizers is that they have a data-first strategy. They're getting information about us and using that to expand their ecosystem. And again, they're colliding with the incumbents, the set-top boxes and cable companies that have kind of established this space but have seen it radically change. And what's really important, again, for this new wave of colonizers is that these are strategic anchors around which they can extend their ecosystems of services all across our homes, across our devices. Amazon now will integrate Alexa with a new model Mercedes and BMW. So you can talk to Alexa in your living room and have Alexa give commands to your car in the garage. So again, this sort of strategic anchor for extending their ecosystems. But I want to pause a little bit because we're talking about the home here. And while technology really does seem to try to get into everything around us, one of the sort of core values of the home is that it insulates us from change. It allows us to have some privacy and some intimacy. And that runs counter in some ways to this new wave of data-driven sort of home appliances. Now, as we become digital, as we leave footprints everywhere, this increasingly is placing our identity at the center. More and more services arrange themselves around understanding who we are as individuals. All of these big players are in a way about our identity. They're about our personal interests. And increasingly, they customize their offerings based on what they know about us. Facebook is extraordinarily successful at this. Their entire stack is really about modeling us, mapping our network relationships, so that they can better match content with who they think we are. And increasingly, they can predict our behaviors based on this. And this has been extraordinarily successful. And again, Facebook has 1.5 billion daily active users. So these are really, really massive platform footprints and aggregations. This is just sort of an anecdote. This showed up in my Instagram feed. And what's interesting about this is an item from my Amazon wish list. So we're starting to see some permeability across the sort of walled gardens that can sort of track our identity, sort of in the way that cookies did this on the web, but now it's becoming omni-channel, where these entities sort of know where we are across all these different touch points. So much so that we could say that media is watching us, and this is really becoming more and more true because we have a lot to offer to media. Our physical identity is also starting to become recognizable. We have biometrics built into our mobile devices that keychain into all sorts of services. We have face recognition that's starting to be deployed across some of our consumer devices. Voice recognition, being able to pick our voice out of a crowd, out of our living room with other family members. So this ability to understand who we are is not just digital. It's increasingly going to be a physical component. And all this stuff allows these things to become more and more personalized, to create these sophisticated models of us, to be sensitive to our behaviors. And that has lots of interesting implications for how we design content, how you get to know your customers, and of course, for how we relate to privacy and intimacy and what we're willing to share about our lives. It has lots of issues for trust. Now, so much of this is really happening right now because we kind of had this period of gathering lots and lots of data, and it turns out that what you need to get good AI is lots and lots of data. So we now see this sort of second coming of artificial intelligence. This is Jan LeCun. He runs Facebook's artificial intelligence group. And really, so much of what Facebook does is based upon their ability to look at those 1.5 billion people, which is an enormous scale, and train algorithms to watch us. And every time we make a post, every time we like something, we are in turn training the Facebook model of us. Similarly with voice assistants, these things are listening and learning as we speak to them. They learn about our voices, our inflections, our manners. They also learn about our search habits, our personal interests, possibly our relationships. We're really training these learning systems to learn better and to learn more about us. All of these big players are investing massive amounts of capital into AI. For most of them, artificial intelligence is the core of their strategy. And of course, this is spreading out to more and more large enterprises that really understand that it's about the data you get from your customers, from your hardware, from your operations, and how you can then derive insights and understanding and predictions from that data by using artificial intelligence. And this is kind of fascinating, right? Because more and more these leading platforms that are the largest companies on the planet are really being designed to learn about us in aggregate, but also as individuals. Uyala is an interesting example. They're a young startup, but they're sort of a web service and a mobile service that learns what type of content we like. And then it assembles channels that are personalized to our interests. So it then starts to say, well, you like all these things. Let me create a custom channel just for you, which again shifts that notion of the gatekeepers of media, again, back to putting the customer at the center. We talk about facial recognition. Disney is exploring how to use that to derive emotions from our faces. And so when Disney is trying to develop a new franchise or a new story, they use this to do test runs with users in theaters. So they're able to show you a preview of the film and derive the emotional content of our reaction. So getting more and more granular data about how their content, how their storytelling is impacting us. And of course, they take that data and feed it back into their product development line. Netflix, of course, has been data-driven for some time. There's sort of the canonical example now of House of Cards. If you like Kevin Spacey and political drama, they put that together and they found House of Cards. But they're doing that more and more, not only to develop content for niche audiences, but then also to find those niche audiences and effectively market to them. This is a great example from this past summer. IBM and Wimbledon got together. And essentially, IBM developed a video machine vision system on the courts that would watch for big plays, watch for audience reactions, and it would sort of flag those, and then very rapidly and autonomously generate sort of 2-minute highlight reels, video reels showing the highlights of the play. And it does this all autonomously. So this is actually removing people from the storytelling process altogether, which has some, kind of profound implications in some ways. But this is all sort of becoming the standard model that you acquire data about your users. You can then model them with artificial intelligence. You can use that to target them with niche content designed to sort of meet their profiles. And then you watch how they react, and you gather more data and you repeat that loop again and again and again. And now we as users, as the folks who are watching the media, are now also confronting some new and very interesting and potentially disruptive ways to interact with storytelling. This is kind of all built on this sort of wave of the last 10 years of media, which has really been about shifting publishing away from a small set of gatekeepers and really asking everybody to be stars, inviting everybody to publish and produce content. This, of course, has been tremendously disruptive. But with the emergence of blurred reality, we're sort of also having this opportunity to walk into the screen. And that has some, profound implications. A lot of this seems to be driven by gaming, because we're used to that kind of interactive first-person storytelling or third-person. Gaming receipts, revenues, $85 billion in 2016, which well outpaces the global box office receipts. This is giving the rise of esports, which is itself becoming a large phenomenon, and a spectator sport, which is really fascinating. That gaming is not just about those who want to play the game, it's also increasingly about those who want to watch the game. Amazon bought Twitch for $1 billion, roughly. Twitch is really about social gaming, not just for people playing the games, but for the audience. They have enormous amounts of content and content creators, again, opening this field wide open for all sorts of different people to publish and entertain. 22,000 members of the Twitch Partner Program, so this huge ecosystem that they're building. We now have virtual reality that is really good enough. The first generation of headsets and hardware have they take you someplace. They sort of satisfy this basic need. We're seeing some good adoption on that, not tremendous, and a lot of it is contained within this sort of gaming vertical. But now we're starting to see the next generation of headsets. Facebook just announced theirs. We'll expect more from HTC and some of the other players, but that will drive down the prices and raise the performance, and hopefully lower the barrier of entry and bring more and more people into VR. VR still is young, though. We're not exactly sure what to do with it and how to really take advantage of its differences. So there's still a lot of issues around developing content that's really native and unique to virtual reality. Again, all the big gaming platforms are moving into this. They're really leading this experience, defining the best practices, figuring out the problems, and putting tons and tons of money into this. And of course, there is interest in building an ad analytics layer, that when you're in virtual reality, how is the media watching you, watching your interactions, watching your gaze, and trying to model us, again, like Facebook does, so that you can deliver advertising and extract analytics off of that. We'll see similar things as augmented reality starts to advance. AR is definitely gaining more speed. A lot of the big players like Apple has its AR kit now, Facebook has a dev kit as well. They're trying to induce the market to experiment with content. But ultimately, augmented reality relies on headwear, on essentially being in your glasses and not making you look overtly like you're in augmented reality. So there's some lag. We're waiting for the hardware, waiting for things like Magic Leap to show us if that's going to be possible. This is an example of BMW basically bringing a showroom into your living room. Pokemon Go was lauded as sort of this big win for AR. I'd caution on that this is a big win for Pokemon. It's a very big franchise. It's easy for Pokemon to access its market and get its users onto whatever it decides to do. So lead with the franchise and the brand, and then see how the technology can allow you to do something new, to create a new experience, to connect with your users in a new way. Disney is doing some interesting stuff with mixed immersion. So this is a sort of mock-up of its Star Wars theme park, and this is the hotel. The hotel is designed to look like you're on some sort of spacecraft, and that window there is actually a screen that's rendering what looks like the view of the cosmos as you're passing through it. So it's a really interesting way of mixing these realities. The Void does this really effectively. They're also part of the Disney Accelerator, but essentially they have this giant warehouse with hard structures built into it, and then you put on your VR headset, and the experience of the VR maps onto the warehouse. So as you're walking through this space and you've come to a ladder in VR, you're actually climbing the ladder in the warehouse as well. So kind of again, this way of blending these worlds. And all of this ultimately is responsive, just as TV has been and cable and movies, to this need, this desire we have to explore, to be adventurers, to have experiences, to go to other places. We want all of this, and media is slowly, gradually evolving to, again, open up the screen and invite us in to make it a more realistic sort of participation in storytelling. Now, there are all sorts of challenges to how quickly these technologies are going to be adopted by us. They're expensive, particularly when you get into VR and AR, but more so there's challenges with privacy and surveillance. When we talk about inviting connected devices into the home or allowing ourselves to be fully measured and identified continuously, sooner or later, we're going to start to run into the edges of that, and where it really starts to feel like it's violating our sense of privacy. And so brands are going to have a hard time establishing trust as this new landscape evolves. And there may be demographic components that younger generations are more comfortable with this sort of thing. They've grown up in a networked digital world. It's really expensive to do AI and to do big data, and that sort of ensures that the most competitive, the largest, those who have the most advantage are the ones that can afford to do it. Similarly with VR and AR, and those also haven't really proven broad value yet. There's something there, but we're trying to understand what the uniqueness of it is. And as we do so, we're going to run into challenges with ergonomics and human factors. What does it mean to be in a VR space physically for long durations? What about AR occlusion? If you're out on the street, you want to be able to see the bus coming at you and not be distracted by a heads-up display, as well as the hardware. We don't really have effective AR hardware just yet. And as adoption ramps up, we'll run into the unexpected. We'll run into the challenges, the problems. This will invoke a regulatory response, could potentially invoke antitrust if we're sort of, in a world where we basically spend all of our time in our Facebook group, and we're in there virtually, and it's painted across our glasses when we're in the real world. What does this mean for social cohesion, for the sense of a shared reality, if we are all sort of viewing our own variation of the world, if we aggregate into virtual communities, sort of the way that politics have played out on Facebook with these sort of subgroups? And what does that mean if people are actually, in those virtually and physically? So there are all sorts of challenges along the way that in large part we won't really encounter until we see more adoption. So again, this is sort of the consequence of becoming digital, of leaving digital footprints everywhere and then inviting that technology into our lives and increasingly into the hardware of our lives, the physical world. That really places our identity at the core of how services are delivered to us and how our behaviors inform product development. This is all being really uplifted by machine learning, and it's being sort of cast out into this sort of new landscape of augmented reality, virtual reality, and blended reality. So it's a very fascinating time, and there's tremendous disruptions happening and tremendous opportunity as well. So that's my talk. Briefly, I want